She dumped her kids on me so she could cheat behind her husband's back. When I was 12, my world shifted in a way that would take years to untangle. My dad remarried. Her name was Sharon, and she brought along her daughter, Kendall. She was 11, just a year younger than me, but you'd think she was some kind of Hollywood import the way everyone reacted to her arrival. Blonde curls, wide smile, a voice just loud enough to cut through every room she entered. At first, I didn't think much of it. New people meant new dynamics, I got that. But it didn't take long to notice how quickly things changed in our house. Kendall wasn't just welcome, she was worshipped. Sharon doted on her like she was the second coming, and my dad, the man who used to throw a ball with me in the backyard or help me with math homework, started orbiting around her like she was the sun, and he was just some sad little planet caught in her gravitational pull. Birthday parties turned into elaborate productions, themed cakes, rented venues, guest lists that sounded like middle school royalty. Mine? Oh, I got a card with $20 and a "we'll do something later, bud." Later never came. Dance lessons, trips to Chicago for shows, new phones every year. Kendall got it all. I remember asking once if I could go to baseball camp with my friends, and Dad barely looked up from his laptop. "Maybe next month," he said. I stopped asking after that. What got to me most wasn't even the gifts or the trips. It was how invisible I became. At dinner, if Kendall interrupted me mid-sentence, the conversation shifted to her without missing a beat. If I got a B on a test, Dad would say I should push harder. When Kendall got a C, it was, "She's got a lot on her plate, don't pressure her." It wasn't hate I felt. It was something heavier. Like I was slowly being erased, replaced by someone shinier, louder, more deserving of love. And no one seemed to notice. Not Sharon. Not Kendall. And worst of all, not Dad. I spent most of high school performing for applause that never came. Honor roll every semester? Barely warranted a nod at dinner. I joined student council, volunteered at the animal shelter, even started working weekends at this cramped cafe when I was 16, just so I could have something to show for myself, something that might make someone, anyone, see me. But none of it ever registered at home. If I asked for help with a project or needed a ride after a late shift, the response was always some version of, "Why can't you be more like Kendall?" Kendall, who forgot her homework half the time and got away with it because she's just expressing herself. Kendall, who could cry on cue, and did, often. One time, she got caught shoplifting lipstick from a mall kiosk. Sharon said she was experimenting with identity, and my dad just rubbed his eyes and muttered something about how girls her age go through phases. Meanwhile, I was pulling double shifts during finals week, sneaking power naps between closing out the register and cramming for biology. No one noticed. No one ever noticed. By the time I turned 18, I'd learned how to disappear so well that it almost felt like a skill. But the thing about silence is it starts to echo if you sit in it too long. So I packed what little I had, emptied my savings account, barely $1,000, and caught a bus to Chicago. Design school wasn't the dream, but it was mine, and it felt like the first decision I made that didn't come with someone else's fingerprints all over it. I didn't know a single person in the city. I lived in a shoebox apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's cat sneeze, and I ate instant noodles 5 nights a week. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's second choice. I wasn't compared or dismissed or told to tone it down. I was just me, broke, exhausted, but finally in my own story. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the message. Kendall, who I hadn't heard from in years, apparently now lived in Chicago. She wrote like we were old friends catching up, like the last decade hadn't happened the way it did. "Joel got transferred," she said. "We're moving to the city. I thought of you right away." Thought of me. That line stuck for some reason, like it meant something it didn't. I stared at the message for a while, debating whether to ignore it, delete it, block her number, or just pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity, or maybe something weaker, won out. I replied. A week later, she was standing in my lobby, all smiles and Target bags, her 2 kids already running circles around her soft-spoken husband. Joel was everything Kendall wasn't: quiet, polite, hands tucked into the sleeves of his sweater like he was always cold or maybe just trying to disappear. He shook my hand with a kind of hesitation, like he wasn't sure if he was interrupting something, and thanked me more times than I could count before we'd even left the lobby. The kids were loud but not rude. Typical chaos. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. 1 week. Help them settle in. Be the bigger person. So I did what she asked. I helped them set up gas and internet, stood in line at the DMV with Joel so he could update his license, lent them my toolbox, even fixed a jam drawer in their new kitchen. I told myself I was just being practical. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't trying to earn anything. But there was a part of me, the version of me that used to sit at dinner tables hoping someone would ask how my day was, that still wanted to be noticed. On day 6, she called me while I was at work. Her voice was all honey and urgency. We're still living out of boxes. It's been impossible to unpack with the kids running around. Could you maybe just watch them for a couple hours? Just until we finish the kitchen? I stared at the phone for a second too long before answering. It wasn't even that I didn't want to help. It was the assumption. Like I was just a tool on her shelf she could pick up when needed. But I said yes anyway. Because some patterns are hard to unlearn, especially when they're stitched into your upbringing. It started like most traps do, small, almost innocent. Just a few hours, she'd said. Just until the kitchen was sorted, until the closets were unpacked, until the moving dust settled. But by the end of the week, it wasn't a one-off favor anymore. It was a routine I hadn't agreed to. Kendall began showing up without warning. No texts, no heads up. She'd buzz the front door, and before I could even think about pretending I wasn't home, there she was, kids in tow, makeup half done like she was late to something vaguely important. Thanks again, she'd say, already halfway back to the elevator. You're a lifesaver. I never even got the chance to object. And then she'd be gone, for 5, 6 hours at a time. At first, I tried to roll with it. I figured maybe it was a one-week adjustment thing. Maybe Joel had long work days and Kendall just needed space. But days bled into more days, and my apartment turned into their personal daycare center. I'd be mid-client call, trying to talk branding strategy with a startup CEO, while a toddler screamed over who got the blue crayon. I started scheduling meetings at night, just so I could work in peace. Not that peace lasted long. Not when your living room smells like snack crumbs and your dining table is sticky with grape juice. The worst part wasn't even the noise or the chaos. It was how normal she acted about it. Like it was perfectly reasonable to drop your kids off unannounced, vanish for half the day, and then show up with a smile and a story about a spontaneous yoga class or a nail appointment that just couldn't be missed. No apologies. No explanations. Just that same smug, breezy tone she always used growing up. The one that said rules were for other people. When I finally brought it up, asked her to maybe give me a little warning or, ask if I was available, she blinked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. But your family, she said, like that phrase was a key to every locked door, a justification for every boundary she trampled over. And that's when it clicked. I hadn't helped them settle in. I hadn't stepped up as a supportive brother. I'd become their unpaid, full-time babysitter. And the worst part? I was doing it all from the same place I once swore I'd never return to. Invisible, unappreciated, and once again the afterthought to Kendall's spotlight. The Friday I got promoted should have been one of the better nights of my adult life. I had worked late every night that week, bled through deadlines, reworked pitch decks until I couldn't see straight, and finally got the call that morning. The one that confirmed I was no longer someone's assistant or fallback. I was officially stepping into my own space, leading my own projects. My team had planned a small get-together at this bar downtown. Nothing extravagant, just drinks and dumb jokes and a few hours where I could finally feel like I wasn't drowning. I told Kendall 3 days in advance that I wouldn't be available that evening. I was clear. Not vague, not hinting. I told her flat out. I won't be around Friday night. I've got plans. She said, of course, smiled like she understood, and went on with her day like she always did. So when the doorbell rang at 6:30, I already knew. I stood there for a second, hoping maybe, just maybe, it was food delivery or a neighbor needing help with a package. But it was never that. I opened the door, and there she stood, kids fidgeting behind her, jackets half-zipped, one of them already holding a juice box from my fridge that she must have helped herself to earlier. She didn't ask. She didn't check. She just pushed the kids toward me, muttered, "Thank you," like I was some hotel concierge, and walked off. I stood there frozen, promotion still echoing in the back of my mind, my dress shirt now at the mercy of sticky hands and questions about what channel cartoons were on. I texted my friends, told them I couldn't make it, made up some lie about a last-minute emergency. And then I sat down, in my own apartment, holding someone else's evening, someone else's responsibilities, while mine quietly unraveled. 3 hours later, the front door opened like it always did, without knocking. Kendall waltzed in, hair done, lip gloss still fresh, holding a plastic cup from some event I hadn't been invited to. She looked around like nothing was out of the ordinary and said, "Thanks again, you're the best." Already reaching for her kids' backpacks. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just stood there, everything in me tight and hollow. "No," I said. "We're done." She blinked, confused. "What? We're done? I'm not your sitter. I'm not your backup plan. I had plans tonight, important ones, and you didn't even ask. You just showed up and dropped them off like I'm some after-school program." Her smile twisted into something sharper, colder. "Are you serious right now? You're really going to blow up like this because you missed a bar night?" It wasn't just a bar night. It was my promotion. And it's not just tonight. It's been every day. You don't ask, you don't check, You don't even say thank you half the time. You just assume I'll drop everything because you decided I should. Kendall's mouth curled in that way it always did when she didn't get her way. You're so selfish, she snapped, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. And there it was, the same line that used to echo through our house growing up, whenever I wanted something that didn't include her. When I asked for time, space, respect. When I tried to be seen. It was always the same word, thrown at me like a slap. Selfish. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't explain or backpedal or try to make her understand. I just stood there, watching her pack up her kids, watching her huff and mutter and try to paint herself as the victim in a story I had been shoved into without consent. When they finally left, the silence in my apartment felt like air after suffocating. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something close to clarity, the kind that comes when you realize you've been bending so long, you forgot you had a spine. I locked the door behind them, turned off the lights, and sat down in the quiet. I had missed my party. I had lost the evening, but I had drawn a line, and that felt like something worth celebrating all the same. It was 3 days after the fallout with Kendall. I had finally caught up on the sleep I'd been missing for weeks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my apartment actually looked like it belonged to me again. The toys were gone, the sticky fingerprints wiped off the coffee table, and the constant background noise of cartoons had been replaced by the hum of my own thoughts. I wasn't celebrating, exactly. There wasn't much joy in cutting ties, even with someone who'd taken so much, but I was at peace. Or I thought I was. The call came in just before noon. I was midway through reorganizing my workspace when I saw his name flash on my phone screen. Dad. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Years, if you count actual conversations and not the hollow birthday texts or forwarded articles about construction trends. I stared at the screen for a moment, wondering if maybe something had happened. A heart attack. A fall. Something that would justify the sudden outreach. But when I picked up, his voice was steady, clipped, not worried, not warm, just disappointed before he even said the words. Eric, he said. No small talk. No preamble. I heard what happened with your sister. Of course he had. That was Kendall's magic. No matter how much damage she did, she always knew how to spin it into a sob story by the time it reached him. I braced myself, said nothing. She's going through a rough patch, he continued, as if I hadn't lived through the mess she created firsthand. Joel's under pressure at work. She doesn't have many friends in the city. She's overwhelmed. I let him talk. It was like he had a script in front of him, one he didn't even have to think about, because he'd been using versions of it since I was a kid. You need to be more supportive, he said, like it was a fact, like it was my obligation. I almost laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. He hadn't asked how I was. He hadn't asked what actually happened. It wasn't about me at all. It never was. I told her no. I said, finally. That's not a crime. There was a pause, then the edge in his voice sharpened. Eric, if this is how you're going to treat your family, maybe we need to rethink a few things. Maybe I need to reconsider how much support I give you. It hit me then, not the threat itself, but the sheer absurdity of it. Because here's the thing. I'd been paying my own bills since I left for college. Tuition, rent, groceries, everything. He hadn't sent me a dime in years. And yet he still thought he had that kind of leverage. Like I was some 20-year-old still calling home for gas money. Like I owed him obedience in exchange for money that never came. I didn't yell. I didn't break down. I just exhaled slowly and said the words I should have said years ago. Then cut me off. He didn't respond right away. I think he expected me to backpedal, to grovel or apologize, to beg for his approval the way I used to when I was 13 and desperate for some acknowledgement. But I didn't flinch. I stood there in my own apartment, paid for by my own work, surrounded by the quiet I had finally reclaimed, and waited. He cleared his throat. I'm disappointed in you, he said, and it landed like a final stamp on a document that had already been signed and sealed. The line went dead a moment later. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the screen, feeling everything at once and nothing at all. Anger, yes. It was always there when it came to him. That bitter, quiet rage that came from years of being second place in your own family. But there was something else too. Relief. Like I had finally closed a door that should have been locked a long time ago. There was no going back. No performance left to give. No more shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. He had drawn his line in the sand. And for once, I didn't bother stepping over it. It was a random Tuesday when the message came through. I was half asleep on the couch. A movie I wasn't even watching playing in the background when my phone buzzed. It was from Brian, a guy I'd known since my first year in the city. We weren't best friends, but he'd helped me land a freelance gig back when I was still figuring things out, and we stayed in touch. His message was short, no context, just, hey, I saw Kendall at the mall earlier. She was with some guy. They were kissing. Looked cozy. At first, I thought he had her confused with someone else. I even stared at the text for a solid minute, trying to make the pieces fit in a way that didn't burn. But then the timing hit me like a gut punch. That afternoon, the same one Brian was talking about, she dropped the kids off with me for a quick run to the store. She hadn't even bothered to lie creatively. Just vague enough to sound harmless. Just familiar enough that I didn't question it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I cared about her marriage, I didn't. Joel seemed like a decent guy, but I wasn't in the business of defending a man who barely made eye contact. What kept me up was something else. The realization that even now, after everything, she was still using me. Not just as a crutch, but as a shield, a built-in excuse for her to disappear whenever she wanted. It wasn't just inconsiderate. It was calculated. So the next time she called, 2 days later, this time with a polished apology about not wanting things to be awkward between us, I said yes. I told her I could watch the kids that afternoon. I played the part. She didn't even hesitate. Just thanked me sweetly and said she'd be back by 5. Like it was all perfectly reasonable. She left at 2:30. By 2:45, I had dropped the kids off with Brian, who offered without asking, already reading between the lines, and I was in my car, headed to the mall. I wasn't even sure what I was hoping to see. Part of me still thought maybe Brian had been wrong, that maybe it was a misread, some old friend or inside joke. But another part of me, the tired, sharpened part that had been on the receiving end of her charm one too many times, knew better. I didn't have to look long. She was at the outdoor section of the mall, near the fountain, wearing those oversized sunglasses she always pulled out when she wanted to look important. The guy was tall, clean-cut, business casual. His arm was around her waist like it belonged there. They weren't just friendly. They weren't subtle. At one point, she leaned into him, laughing, brushing something off his shoulder. Then she kissed him. Quick, like they were used to sneaking affection between errands. I stayed back, half shielded by a patio umbrella outside a smoothie place. I didn't want to see more than I had to, but I needed proof. Not because I planned to confront her, but because I wanted something real to hold on to. Something solid, something undeniable. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Kindle, mid-laugh, her head tilted back, her hand in his. It wasn't blurry. It wasn't vague. It was exactly what it looked like. I left before she saw me, drove back to pick up her kids, handed them juice boxes, and waited for the familiar sound of the elevator door. She arrived at 5:07. Hair a little tousled, lipstick reapplied. Thanks again, she said, smiling like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word. Not yet. But the photo was sitting in my phone, a time-stamped souvenir of the day I finally stopped doubting what I already knew. Some people don't change. They just find new ways to get what they want. I sent the photos to Joel at 9:30 in the morning. No caption, no explanation, no theatrics. Just 3 images, clear, time-stamped, unmistakable. One of them showed Kindle's hand in his. Another had her mid-laugh, leaning in like they were sharing a private joke. The last was the kiss. Not long, not dramatic, but direct. I didn't want to add commentary. It wasn't my story to spin. I just wanted the facts to speak for themselves. I didn't expect a reply. Joel struck me as the kind of man who dealt with things quietly, the kind who didn't raise his voice even when the walls caved in. So when he texted me that afternoon, a single line, "Thank you," I suspected, but I needed to know for sure. It landed harder than anything else could have. No rage, no accusation, just exhaustion in digital form. I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone and placing it face down on the table. There was nothing left to say. Kindle, however, had plenty to say. She called 3 times before I picked up. When I finally answered, her voice was already breaking from screaming. "You're jealous," she snapped before I could get a word in. "You always have been. You couldn't stand that someone finally wanted me around. You ruined my life." I let her rant. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just listened as she spun herself in circles, dragging up things from middle school, family dinners, childhood games like they were pieces of a puzzle that somehow excused what she'd done. And then came the cherry on top, our father. He called within the hour. This time, there was no pretense of calm. No long lectures dressed up as concern. Just anger. Righteous, blustering, decades-old anger. "You betrayed the family," he said, like he was announcing a court sentence. "You went behind your sister's back, humiliated her, humiliated all of us. What kind of man does that?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. It wasn't. But because I had spent so many years trying to avoid exactly this moment. So many years swallowing my own anger to keep peace that never protected me. So many years convincing myself that if I just held on, if I just stayed quiet long enough, maybe I'd finally earn their respect. But here it was, the accusation I'd been running from, finally spoken out loud. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain. I just hung up. Then I opened my contacts and blocked every single one of them. Kindle, my father, even the random aunt who still sent me Bible verses once a month. I walked over to the front door, took the spare keys off the hook, and changed the locks that evening. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing closure. I wasn't hoping they'd come around. I wasn't waiting for someone to finally admit they were wrong. I chose something else. Peace, silence, space. I stopped playing the villain in their script. I stepped out of their story and into my own. And maybe that's what real freedom looks like. Not vindication. Not revenge. Just letting go of people who were never going to see you as more than a supporting role in their chaos.